Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the knowledge you've gathered, your articles, your research, your notes, and, well, we try to distill it.
We give you the clearest, most actionable insight we can find in the material.
And today, we are tackling something. It's truly profound and, frankly, pretty counterintuitive. We're looking at the deepest possible states of meditative concentration.
It's not just a study of concentration, though, is it? It's really an investigation into a paradox.
Paradox, yeah.
The core challenge that your source material brings up is fundamental to the entire practice. It's this. How do you achieve these profound states of absorption? The jhanas.
And then the even more rarefied formless dimensions, the upajanas.
Exactly. How do you do that when the very mechanism of the practice is based on the idea that the self, the doer, the director, is supposed to be dissolving?
That's the puzzle. We're going to deep dive into the actual mechanics of attention. If I, the meditator, am actively placing my mind and keeping it connected in the very beginning.
The initial push.
The initial push, yeah. What happens to that effort? To that whole sense of agency when you reach a state so deep that the foundational sense of I am doing this is supposed to have just vanished?
It's a great question. We really need to track the progression of attention from that deliberate, almost forceful effort to an effortless unity.
And then all the way to complete cessation.
And the sources you've gathered, they provide a remarkably precise blueprint for this. They frame these deep states as the direct, tangible result, the culmination, really, of the Noble Eightfold Path.
Specifically that last part, right immersion or samasamadhi.
That's the one.
So the whole structure, the whole path, is built on this premise of non-self or anatta.
It has to be. The deeper you go, the more you are forced to realize there's nothing permanent to cling to, or even to direct the clinging.
It's an undoing.
Exactly. The source material is so clear on this. The path ripens as letting go. The entire training process is described as sloping, slanting, and inclining toward extinguishment, toward nibbana.
And that relies on, what were the terms? Seclusion.
Seclusion, fading away, and cessation. If the whole goal is freedom from suffering, and that freedom is defined by cessation, then the mechanism must involve the progressive surrender of the components of self that fuel that suffering in the first place.
So the deeper the state,
the more automated it becomes, the more unified,
yeah.
And ultimately the less self-referential the attention has to be.
Okay, let's unpack that doctrinal foundation then. I think we have to, because without understanding what is being relinquished, the jhanas could just look like, I don't know, concentration tricks.
Right, a kind of mental gymnastics.
Yeah. So before we can talk about attention dissolving, we have to define what the tradition says the self is commonly mistaken for.
And that brings us right to the famous 5 grasping aggregates, the khandhas.
The khandhas.
This is where the foundation gets laid. The khandhas are simply the 5 categories of phenomena that when we grasp them, we mistakenly identify them as a permanent, substantial self. They are the components of our conditioned existence.
And just to list them out clearly for everyone, we've got form,
which is the physical body, the material world, all that stuff.
Then feeling so pleasant, unpleasant, neutral sensations.
Mm-hmm.
Perception, which is the mind's ability to recognize and label things. That's a tree, that's a car.
Right, the labeling function. Then you have choices, or what are sometimes called volitional formations.
So intentions, thoughts, the actions that generate karma.
Exactly. And finally, the 5th one is consciousness.
The awareness that knows the other 4. The sort of background awareness.
The knowing faculty itself. Now, what's so crucial here, and your source material just hammers this point home again and again, is that these 5 aggregates are the very definition of suffering itself.
Not just a cause of suffering, but the definition of it.
The definition. The very first noble truth, the noble truth of suffering, or dukkha, is defined explicitly in the texts as the 5 grasping aggregates. Full stop.
That feels so radical even today. We tend to view our consciousness as the ultimate pristine essence of who we are, or maybe our feelings as the gauge of our life experience. Why define these things as suffering?
It all comes down to one word: impermanence. Annika.
Change.
Constant change. The sources stress that every single one of these aggregates, form, feeling, perception, choices, consciousness, every single one is characterized by arising, vanishing, and changing while it's here.
They're all perishable.
Fundamentally perishable. So if you attach your identity, your sense of me, to something that is guaranteed to change, to decay, and to pass away, Well, the suffering inherent in that is inevitable.
It's like trying to build your house on a sand dune.
Or trying to make your home out of smoke.
Yeah.
The minute you try to settle in, it just dissipates. It's a flawed strategy from the start.
Okay, so that brings us to the formula for freedom. If suffering is grasping the impermanent, the solution has to be a kind of right understanding.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The wisdom required for release is the ability to look at any of these 5 aggregates, whether it's past, future, or present, coarse or subtle, internal or external, and realize with total conviction, this is not mine, I am not this is not myself.
And the connection here to our topic of meditation and attention is absolutely essential. If you regard any of these components, say, the consciousness that's directing your attention, or that pleasant feeling born of seclusion.
The bliss of the jhana state itself.
Right. If you see that as self, then when that state decays or perishes, which it has to because it's a conditioned state, then sorrow, lamentation, and distress are born.
The sense of self is inherently tied to attachment and loss. There's no way around it.
And that leads directly to the second noble truth, the origin of suffering.
It does. The problem isn't the existence of the aggregates themselves. The problem is the grasping onto them. And that grasping is rooted in craving, or tancha. That craving is the driving engine for continued existence.
The fuel for the fire.
The fuel.
Yeah.
And the texts are very specific. They delineate this craving into 3 main categories. There's the craving for sensual pleasures.
The obvious one.
The obvious one. Then there's the craving for continued existence.
The desire for becoming something, for having a stable, ongoing state.
Yes, to persist. And then, subtly, there's also the craving to end existence, a kind of nihilistic urge.
Let's focus on those 3 for a moment, because it seems like the deep meditative states are designed to systematically eradicate exactly these things.
They absolutely are. It's a perfect map. The craving for sensual pleasures is what's suppressed completely, even in the very first jhana.
You have to leave that behind to even get in the door.
Right. Then, the craving for continued existence, that desire for becoming, for a stable state that's dismantled piece by piece throughout the Rupa and the Upachanas. You see how even the most stable states are impermanent.
And the third one, the craving to end existence.
That's addressed by demonstrating a path that goes beyond mere annihilation. It culminates in the unconditioned, which is neither existence nor non-existence. So the entire Noble Eightfold Path is specifically developed to directly know and remove the fuel that drives these 3 searches.
Okay, so the path is not just a random collection of moral rules. It's a systematic, progressive trajectory. It's engineered to starve the self of its grasping fuel.
It is a gradual training, and it leads, as the texts say, inevitably to deep absorption.
You start with right view and right thought.
The intellectual and ethical understanding, the map.
That leads to right speech, action, and livelihood, the foundation of ethical conduct in the world.
You can't have a peaceful mind if your life is chaotic and causing harm. It's the necessary ground.
And only with that ethical stability can you truly start to purify the mind through right effort and right mindfulness.
Which then, and only then, culminates in right immersion, or samasamadhi.
And the goal, to bring it back, is the inverse of effort. It's seclusion, fading away, and cessation.
Precisely. The development of this whole path is designed to culminate in the removal of greed, hate, and delusion. It must rely on seclusion, fading away, and cessation. And it ultimately ripens as letting go.
So the systematic trajectory, where the process of freedom requires letting go of the very building blocks of self.
That's the essential prerequisite. You have to grasp that to understand how attention can possibly cease to be directed in the jhanas. The mind is being trained to operate and ultimately cease autonomously.
All right, now we can move from the theory to the practice, onto the meditation cushion itself. The 4 Rupa jhanas. They aren't just intense focusing exercises.
No, not at all. They're defined as the fulfillment of right immersion and, crucially, as a training in the higher mind. This is the training in profound stillness and unification.
And the result of this training, if it's done correctly, is a mental state that the texts describe as, well, it's quite a list. Purified, bright, flawless, rid of corruptions, pliable, workable.
Steady and imperturbable.
That purification isn't just a pleasant side effect, is it? It's the necessary basis for attaining the final insight.
It is. It's the platform for the knowledge of the ending of defilements. You need that incredibly stable and pure mind to see reality clearly.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning of that absorption process with Jhana 1. This is really the only stage where we still see that explicit, intentional doing mentioned in the definition. What is the meditator actually doing here?
Jhana 1 is attained First, by being quite secluded from sensual pleasures and unskillful qualities. That seclusion gives rise to rapture and bliss. But the defining factors, the active ingredients, are two specific activities, placing the mind and keeping it connected.
And I think we need to linger on those two Pali terms, vitakka and vikara, because they seem to define the nature of conscious directed effort. So vitakka is usually translated as initial application or placing the mind.
Yes, vitakka is the mind's initial strike. It's the forceful, deliberate direction of attention onto the object, say, the breath, or maybe a visual sign like a light in nimitta.
So it's the effort it takes to lift the mind out of the swamp of sensual thinking and lock it onto a single point of focus.
Exactly, it's an act of will.
And then vikara, the second factor, is the sustained application, keeping it connected.
Vikara is the steady persistence. It's the continuous adjustment and the subtle effort required to keep that focus stable. It's what prevents the mind from drifting away or becoming scattered. This dual action is the absolute peak of directed effort.
This is the active agency. The doer is working hard here.
Very hard. Working to overcome the 5 hindrances, desire, aversion, sloth, restlessness, and doubt, to achieve that initial stability.
Okay, but here's the paradox again. This is the core question for our listener. If concentration requires this kind of focused, sustained effort, wouldn't removing that effort just lead to the mind scattering and wandering off again? How does stability actually increase when you stop doing?
And this is the genius of the transition to the second jhana. The initial effort, that placing and keeping connected, the vitakka and vikara, it's necessary to generate the mental energy. It builds momentum and unity. But once that unity is stable and powerful enough, the effort itself becomes redundant.
It becomes a disturbance.
It becomes a disturbance. The system is now self-correcting. It has enough momentum to stay on track by itself.
So the move from jhana 1 to jhana 2 is defined by subtraction, by relinquishing those active factors.
Absolutely. The texts are explicit. The second absorption is entered as the placing of the mind, vitakka, and keeping it connected,
Right.
vikara, are still.
It just stops.
They stop. That is the mechanical answer to how attention proceeds without direction. The initial forceful application is dropped. The mind simply remains absorbed. It doesn't need the push anymore.
So what replaces that sense of conscious, directed effort? What's the feeling tone of jhana 2?
What remains is, first, internal clarity, or a kind of deep confidence, sampasadana. And the mind becomes unified, or mind at one, ekaggata. The state is just flooded with rapture and bliss born of immersion.
And the sources say this rapture is explicitly called rapture not of the flesh.
Yes, to emphasize its sublime, purified nature. It's completely distant from sensual delight. The mind has achieved a state of singular, effortless flow.
The sources use a beautiful analogy here that I think really captures this shift from external effort to an autonomous internal flow. Can you tell us about the deep lake?
The deep lake analogy is perfect for this. It is one of the best in the canon for illustrating self-sustaining stability. Imagine a deep lake, a spring-fed lake, and that lake is fed only by spring water welling up from within its own depths.
So no external inlet stream, no rain filling it up?
None. The cool water permeates, drenches, and spreads throughout the entire lake, entirely from its own internal source.
Wow. That's a powerful image. The state is not being maintained by any external means. No active input, no director continually adding water from a bucket.
Exactly. It's drawing on the energy, the unification, generated by the practice itself. In the same way, the meditator's body, their mind, their consciousness, they're drenched, steeped, and filled with this autonomously generated rapture and bliss.
So the bliss is not dependent on the conscious act of placing the mind.
No, it's dependent on the state of unification that was achieved by the previous effort. The agency of the doer has been replaced by the functional purity of the mind itself.
Okay, that clarifies the dropping of mental effort. That's a huge piece of the puzzle. But the journey of dissolution, of letting go, continues. We have to move past the intense, sometimes almost overwhelming rapture of jhana 2 and into jhana 3 and 4.
Right. And here the stilling moves past that emotional intensity and into the physical realm.
So jhana 3, what happens to the rapture?
In jhana 3, the intensity of that rapture begins to fade away. Rapture, though sublime, is still exhilarating, it's still an excitement, and therefore it's a potential distraction.
Still a thing happening.
It's still a thing. In jhana 3, that energy is replaced by a profound sense of equanimity, a balanced, unshakable stability. The meditator is still experiencing bliss, but it's a calm, collected bliss. They are described as being mindful and aware with equanimity.
So it's a deepening of the internal peace that was established in Jhana too.
Yes, it's a psychological refinement. You're moving from a state of intense spiritual excitement to profound, unshakable acceptance. The doing continues to dissipate.
And that leads to Jhana 4, the final Rupa Jhana. Here the last remnants of agitation disappear entirely.
In Jhana 4, the physical and emotional remnants are gone. This state is attained by giving up pleasure and pain entirely, reaching a state of pure equanimity and mindfulness.
And critically, this is the stage where the sources say the physical processes are stilled.
Yes.
What does that actually mean for physical processes to be stilled? I mean, does that mean the body stops functioning?
It's not that it stops functioning entirely, but it refers to the subtlest, most immediate physical responses that are tied to our mental states. The breath becomes extremely fine, almost imperceptible. The heartbeat slows dramatically. The sense of bodily mass where the boundary of the skin can fade significantly.
So the intentional volitional link between mind and body is suspended.
Exactly. The mind has achieved such a deep, unshakable stability that it's described with that list again. Pliable, workable, steady, and imperturbable. The effort, which began as that deliberate direction in Jhana 1, has now progressed through effortless internal clarification in J2, emotional balance in J3, to a state of complete physical and emotional stillness in J4.
This is such a powerful demonstration of the core principle. It's the systematic dismantling of the elements, the aggregates that require personal agency or doing. Jhana 4 becomes the necessary platform for the next incredible step, transcending form altogether.
And if the Rupa Jhanas were about silencing the body and stabilizing attention, the Arupa Jhanas, the formless dimensions, are about dissolving the very perception of form itself.
So we're moving beyond even subtle feelings and specific perceptions.
We're moving into increasingly abstract, subtle substrates of consciousness.
The sources mention something interesting here, that the mind, which didn't leap forth when it was focused on form in Jhana 4, now will leap forth when focusing on the formless.
Right. This transition is described as the escape from forms.
So what does going totally beyond perceptions of form actually mean for the meditator subjectively? What does that feel like?
It means moving beyond any awareness that is tied to the physical body, the external world, or even the internal sense of physical boundaries. The texts describe it as going totally beyond perceptions of form, disappearing perceptions of impingement, and not focusing on diversity.
Okay, let's nail down that term. Perceptions of impingement. What are we talking about here?
Impingement refers to the subtle, ongoing perception of contact or resistance. It's the sense of your body occupying space, the slight pressure of air on your skin, or even the inner feeling of your organs functioning.
So in the Rupa Jhanas, these are stilled, but the idea of form, the concept of a body, still persists.
Exactly. To enter the first Grupa, you have to dismantle the final cognitive trace of those boundaries.
And once that boundary is dissolved, the mind leaps forth into Arupa 1, the dimension of infinite space.
Yes. The awareness shifts entirely to the boundlessness of non-physicality. The mind becomes aware that space is infinite. And this isn't the physical space outside the body in the room. It's the infinite expanse perceived by the unified mind when it has successfully dropped the perception of form and all its limitations.
The sense of doing or directing attention must be almost completely non-existent here, right? It's not an active search for space.
No, it's the automatic recognition of space when form ceases to be perceived. The mind is just resting on the sheer boundlessness of the container it now inhabits.
But even this state is conditioned. It's still a state.
It is. It's defined by the perception of infinite space, which is still a conceptual object, as vast as it may be. And so the meditator must recognize the inherent impermanence of this perception, too.
Which brings us to Arupa 2, the dimension of infinite consciousness. How do you transcend infinite space itself?
By turning the attention, what's left of it, back on the subject of that infinite space. The practitioner goes totally beyond infinite space and realizes that the source of that boundlessness is consciousness itself. The perception of the dimension of infinite space simply ceases.
And the new focus becomes consciousness is infinite.
That's the new perception. It's an incredibly subtle shift. It's like moving from staring at the vast sky to suddenly realizing the vastness of the eye that's doing the staring.
But still, this is a state defined by something, by the limitlessness of awareness.
Exactly. And because the path is about letting go of all conditioned phenomena, we must transcend even infinite consciousness.
Which leads to Arupa 3, the dimension of nothingness.
Yeah.
That concept, nothingness, carries immense philosophical weight. What does it mean in this very specific meditative context?
It means going totally beyond infinite consciousness to the direct realization that there's nothing at all. It's the negation of the previous two dimensions. Having abandoned form and then space and then consciousness as a definable object, the mind is left with a profound emptiness.
The sources suggest this is a state that's very closely associated with freedom. They say a noble disciple gains confidence in this dimension and that the mind is freed by wisdom here.
Because at this stage, the mind has systematically dismantled the foundational elements that could sustain the craving for continued existence. If you cannot find a locus for self in form or in space or even in an infinite awareness, where can grasping possibly take hold?
It has nothing left to grab.
Nothing. This is why the sense of doing is completely absent. The realization that there is nothing at all can only arise when all the previous conceptual supports are relinquished.
And then there is the final, most attenuated state, Arupa 4, the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. This has to be the subtlest psychological state before the final cessation.
It is a state so fine it almost defies categorization. Going totally beyond nothingness leaves a mental trace that is so subtle that the practitioner cannot strictly be said to perceive, because no definite objects or concepts register, but they also cannot be said not to perceive.
Because there's still a bare residual form of awareness present.
Yes. It's the difference between a machine being off and being in deep standby mode.
Oh, okay.
It's the absolute minimum viable trace of awareness. The mind is resting at the very apex of possible refinement, totally detached from any sensual or conceptual form, having progressively relinquished every possible object of grasping.
It's the ultimate boundary of conditioned experience.
It is. The entire purpose of the Arupa Jhanas is to systematically dismantle the cognitive foundations for all forms of craving, whether it's for pleasure or space or even boundless consciousness. By conquering these, the mind is finally prepared for the unconditioned.
And this brings us to the zenith of the path. This has to be the definitive answer to our question about agency. We move beyond even that subtle trace of awareness in Arupa 4 and enter the complete cessation of perception and feeling.
The highest state, declared as the eighth liberation.
What happens to the sense of I, the director of attention, at this point?
It's entirely absent, both within the state itself and, crucially, upon emergence from it. The cessation of perception and feeling is the absolute endpoint of the entire trajectory of letting go.
The source material provides one of the most powerful examples of non-agency right here. Tell us how the mendicant emerges from this state.
The text states unequivocally that a mendicant emerging from the cessation of perception and feeling does not think, I will emerge, or I am emerging, or I have emerged.
They don't think I will emerge. That just, it flies in the face of our entire everyday understanding of decision-making. We assume every single action must have a preceding volitional choice. I will stand up, and then I stand up.
But the text is crystal clear. Rather than making a choice, their mind was simply previously developed so as to lead to that state.
So the emergence, the transition back to conditioned reality, it isn't an act of will. It's not a decision by an agent.
No, it is the natural, inevitable, functional endpoint of the deeply refined process. It's like a spring uncoiling when the pressure is released, or a pendulum naturally returning to center when its momentum finally runs out.
This just emphasizes that the entire purification, the right effort, right mindfulness, right immersion, it all culminates in a kind of self-sustaining momentum toward freedom. The hard work of doing was done much, much earlier in the path.
Exactly. The deep state is simply the fruit of that development, and it occurs without any need for a director.
You can see this principle embedded throughout the training, can't you?
You can. For example, in the mindfulness of breathing, the meditator is instructed to practice. I'll breathe in, observing letting go. I'll breathe out, observing letting go. The constant, intentional effort is aimed at relinquishing control, not asserting it.
The stilled physical processes of Jhana 4, the transcending of conceptual objects in the Arupas.
It's all preparatory for this final, utterly non-volitional cessation.
Okay, but this leads to a fascinating, almost mystical paradox that we have to clarify. Just before that ultimate cessation in those deepest absorptions, the sources discuss a state where one wouldn't perceive what is seen, heard, thought, known, and yet they would still perceive.
Yes.
How can you not perceive, but still perceive? What's going on there?
This is the crucial distinction between deep concentration and just, utter mental oblivion or being unconscious, and it defines the nature of ultimate attention. The not perceiving part refers to the cessation of all conditioned, grasping activity.
So no sensory input, no volitional thought, no focusing on the aggregates.
Right. That active, directed attention, the vitakka and vikara from Jhana 1, is entirely gone, long gone.
So what is the residual perceiving? If it's not active attention, what is it resting upon?
It is the subtle, non-conceptual awareness resting on the non-conditioned reality itself. And the source material doesn't leave us guessing. It answers this question definitively by providing the specific content of this ultimate perception.
What is it?
It is perceiving the unshakable truth, and it's described by a very specific formula. This is peaceful. This is sublime. That is, the stilling of all activities, the letting go of all attachments, the ending of craving, fading away, cessation, extinguishment.
That is the perception of nibbana, the unconditioned itself.
It is the highest possible state of awareness. It's an awareness that recognizes its own freedom precisely because all of the conditioned inputs that would require an I to manage or direct have fallen away.
So we can actually synthesize the entire journey of attention for our listener now. It's a clear progression.
Yes, attention progresses from, number 1, directed effort, that's Jhana 1, with the active vitakka and vikara.
To number 2, effortless stability. That's jhanas 2 through 4 with internal unity, stilled mental formations, and a stilled body.
And finally to number 3, non-conceptual realization. This covers the arupas and cessation where the mind is simply recognizing the unconditioned reality, independent of any active doing or volitional agency.
And this entire process serves to broke that cycle of suffering defined by the 5 grasping aggregates. The progression through the jhanas forces the mind to relinquish the objects it could possibly cling to.
It ensures that the self-view can't just reassert itself at higher levels of refinement. If you are not rid of greed, desire, fondness, thirst, passion, and craving for the aggregates, even the refined ones like the feeling of jhana bliss or the consciousness of infinite consciousness, then that clinging view of self will persist.
So the progression acts as a kind of rigorous filter, guaranteeing purity.
That's a great way to put it. This rigor is why even the most profound states, like the second jhana's bliss, are deemed insufficient for ultimate freedom. The Buddha himself highlights that the rapture and bliss born of immersion is a pleasure far, far finer than any sensual pleasure.
But then he immediately points out that there is still a pleasure that is finer than that.
Exactly. That continual push toward the finer, the more subtle, the more relinquished, is the driving engine of the practice. The mendicant is examining the gratification, the drawback, and the escape from even the most sublime aggregates. They realize that even the bliss of jhana is impermanent, and therefore it has a drawback. And that realization allows them to achieve the escape into the unconditioned.
There's a great quote from Venerable Mahāgākkhana that helps understand the practical application of this. He says, a mendicant must examine their consciousness so it is neither scattered externally nor
stuck internally.
Stuck internally.
If the mind gets stuck internally, if it grasps the rapture or the bliss of Jhana 1 as its permanent home, thinking this is it is not yet free. True freedom requires relinquishing attachment to even the most profound happiness generated by these deep states, recognizing them as just more conditioned phenomena.
So the ultimate realization is that the highest, most stable attention states are temporary.
And that the profound peace of the deepest state is literally defined as the stilling of all activities, the letting go of all attachments, the ending of craving, fading away, cessation, and extinguishment.
You cannot do extinguishment.
You can't.
Yeah.
You can only arrive there by having previously developed a mind that has systematically relinquished all need for doing, all sense of agency, and all attachment to the components of conditioned experience. The entire journey confirms that effort is merely the initial catalyst, but freedom is the ultimate subtraction.
So we started this deep dive asking how the deepest states of meditation could possibly progress without a sense of self or without active direction.
And what we found was a precise, step-by-step mechanism within the sources. Attention transitions from the deliberate focusing of Jhana 1, relying on vitakka and vikara,
to the automatic, internally generated stability of Jhana 2, where those factors are entirely stilled. They become obsolete.
And this progression just continues. Stilling the physical body in Jhana 4, transcending all concepts of form and even infinite consciousness in the Arupas, until that ultimate cessation of perception and feeling is reached.
A state that occurs not because a self chose it, but because the path was previously developed to reach its inevitable conclusion.
The great takeaway for you, the learner, listening to this, is this. The key to accessing these deeper states is not to do more, but to progressively relinquish the components of the self-form, feeling, perception, choices, and consciousness that demand direction and effort in the first place.
The profound state is achieved when the process is so well developed that it leads to freedom all on its own, without any requirement for a director.
No director needed.
The highest pleasure, the ultimate freedom, is defined as something even finer than the incredible rapture and bliss of the second jhana. So if cessation, the complete letting go of all activity, leads to this ultimate, unshakable pleasure and freedom,
Then we have to radically reevaluate our entire definition of happiness in the present moment, don't we?
it seems so.
If true bliss lies in the complete and utter letting go, how much of our current mental energy, our grasping, our directing, our constant insistence on personal agency are we spending right now actively blocking our own access to genuine well-being? What part of the self are you ready to stop directing today? That's the question to contemplate as you continue your own journey.